Okay, today we're going to talk about the Meze Poet. This is a new open-back planar magnetic headphone from Meze, and it comes in at around $2,000, around the same price as the Lyric, so this is a high-end boy. And the question is, of course, is this poetry in headphone form, or is it slam poetry, which nobody likes? And today, in this video, that's what we're going to find out. Okay, let's get going here with the review. And I just want to give a disclaimer here. This is a demo unit sent over by Meze for review. Big thanks to Meze for sending it in for me to check out. Of course, I don't get to keep these products. I haven't been paid to say anything in particular about them, and all thoughts and opinions here are my own. So let's just dive right in here and talk about the Meze Poet. Now, this is one of those headphones where the pictures look nice and all, but they don't really do it justice. It's one of those where you take it out of the box and you go, oh, damn. That is a nice looking object. I mean, it has to be said that Antonio's designs and the team over at Meze, they regularly make some of the most incredible looking and feeling and well engineered mechanically products on the market. Every little thing about this is impeccably well engineered, as we've come to expect from Meze's high-end headphones. And speaking of which, this does also use Meze's MZ6 driver, I believe, which is kind of similar to the Elite and the Lyric. They talk a little bit about that in their marketing material. But basically, this is the isodynamic hybrid array driver. You do also get a couple of other things with this headphone. You get this little booklet here that has some nice words in it. Then you also get this nice case. And then the cable here is, it's a really nice braided cable. These are 3.5 millimeter connectors with the TS connection. And that's basically it. When it comes to the mechanical design, you do get full cup swivel, which is great. You get tilt. There's sort of like a springy kind of motion to this with the cup. And the pads are removable and they are magnetic, which is super nice. You'll notice it says AMTS right there. More about that in a moment. But it's not all good things when it comes to the mechanical design on this one, unfortunately. And for starters, I'm not sure if you guys can hear this, but I noticed there's this weird creaking and clicking sound. When I put it on my head, I don't necessarily hear it all the time, but when I'm adjusting it, you know, moving it around and stuff on my head, you can hear that as well. So that's one thing that I'm not too thrilled about. The other thing is you'll notice that the headband style here is this sort of wire system similar to what you find with the DCA headphones. And I am not a fan of this system on this headphone. I actually expect that the comfort for most people is going to be quite good, but for me it is not. I have a large head, let's just put it out there, but I find that the downside with this kind of design is that it kind of keeps its clamp pressure, and I find that where the strap attaches to the arm here, this piece sticks into the side of my head. And it's not like horrifically uncomfortable or anything like that, but it's something that over time I do notice, and it does get to be a little bit annoying. Now, as far as the rest of the design is concerned, it does resemble the Lyric in many ways. It has a similar style of structure to it. One of the things I was not a fan of with the Lyric was that the pad opening was too small for my ears. So this one, I don't seem to have as much of an issue with it, so maybe they improved that. It's nice and long, but it was the width that was too small for me. So this one's about 41 millimeters by, what is this, like 70 millimeters. So I don't find it to be that much of an issue when I'm wearing it. It's not too small like I found the Lyric to be. So for where the cups sit on my head and the pads and everything, that's very comfortable. It's also reasonably lightweight. It's just over 350 grams, helped by the headband that they've designed, that they've chosen to go with here. This is a trade-off, right? I think it's one of those things where you're like, okay, we got to make it lighter. So you come up with a system like this, but then for people with big heads like me, it's maybe not quite as suitable as an alternative design might have been. That's kind of the way I see it. But for most people, you should not have a problem with the comfort. I expect most people will find this to be very comfortable, even if I do not. Now, that's it for the build, the design, and the comfort. Yes, of course, this is a beautiful object, like all Meze headphones tend to be. But this is the most subjective part of this whole hobby, is like how these things look and what that means to people. I love the colorway of this sort of like bronze gold-ish thing with the silver. If it is possible for me to feel emotion towards colors, this is a positive one, okay? Now, moving on to the sound here, and I have to talk a little bit about the drivability because this is a bit weird. The Meze Poet is easy to drive when it comes to power requirements. It's a reasonably high sensitivity and low impedance headphone, around 55 ohm headphone. However, the impedance curve is not linear. And what this means is there is likely a filter going on inside the headphone to have some sort of effect on the tuning in some capacity, which is actually, in my opinion, that's a good way of doing things. However, this also means that if you run it out of a high output impedance amplifier, like a tube amplifier, it is going to have a dramatic effect on the treble frequencies. So basically everything above 2 kilohertz is going to be reduced. And it's up to you to decide if that's something that you want, but if you want the default sound signature with this headphone, you will want to run it off of a low output impedance source. So people talk about how tube amps will warm things up. Well, this is one of the ways that it happens. With this headphone, it is likely to be more dramatic than most because of that impedance relationship. Okay, now let's talk about how this headphone sounds. But before I get into that, let me just plug headphones.com for making all these videos possible. Headphones.com is where we publish all of our educational articles and written reviews and deep dives. They also have a massive, ridiculous 365-day return policy, as well as excellent customer service from our good friend Sam here. So for the overall sound signature here, I would describe it almost kind of like if you blended a Meze Empyrean 1 with a Meze 109 Pro. And that's going to sound good, but also there are some issues. Also, the sound signature here is very similar to what you get with the Modhouse Tungsten, which also sounds very good. However, I find that this one is like several steps back from the Tungsten. The Tungsten to me sounds much more resolving, engaging, all of those sorts of things, whereas the Poet here, while it has similar characteristics, and many of which are good, I would say, like full linear bass extension with a sort of forward character to the lower mids that leads to this kind of like enveloping euphonic characteristic, which is nice. It has a nice pleasant blend of, lower mids and bass with appropriate ear gain. But then there's some colorations here that subjectively stand out in a way that I don't prefer. For folks who are unfamiliar, Meze likes to do this thing where they boost the upper air frequencies by a lot with many of their headphones. So the region above like 12, 13 kilohertz. This also seems to be a characteristic of the isodynamic hybrid array driver that they go for, and this is also part of their what they put in their marketing material about what the driver is supposed to do. So that's the advantage of this kind of design that they have. And if you look at the driver itself, it doesn't look like any conventional planar driver. This is the Renaro. They partner with Renaro for this driver, and this is sort of their claim to fame. But the question is, at least the one that I constantly ask myself with this is that actually a good thing? Does this contribute to sound quality that people like, or is this better? I actually think it's done better on this one than it is on some of their other ones, and there's a lot more to the sound than just that bit. But I do want to let you guys know that this does have that sort of airy, shimmery quality that many of the Meze headphones are known for. For me, it is still a bit too much. You'll notice as well that this has the AMTS logo here. And if you are in the community, into the hobby to a certain degree, you will know what this is. This is what Dan Clark puts in his headphones, so the DCA headphones. So I have behind me the Aeon Noir X. This also uses the AMTS in it. And essentially what it is a sophisticated, very ultra sophisticated waveguide that goes in front of the driver that's meant to tune the sound. And this can be used to surgically affect various different problem frequencies, different resonances and things like that. You can be precise about how you want to tune things. And that's good. Now, Meze's licensing of the AMTS is one of the looser or wider interpretations of what we might think of with this technology. It certainly doesn't resemble what's going on with the DCA headphones, but I guess there's something conceptually familiar with what's going on here in the Poet, otherwise they wouldn't have put the label on it. But I also feel it may have the consequence of being more variable across different heads. So, for example, when I measure this headphone, and I'll throw the graphs up on the screen here for you to see, this doesn't show much of a meaningful peak between like 7 and 9 kilohertz. But subjectively, I hear a very notable peak there. So the sound for this one isn't propagating at my eardrum the way that it is intended to, and certainly not the way that it measures on a headphone test fixture. I would expect this to vary more substantially across real human heads and real human ears as well. So that's really one area where I'm not I'm not 100% sold on this concept, even though it is incredibly useful for being specific about how you want to tune your headphones from a design perspective. As far as the overall sound signature is concerned, it measures reasonably. There are things to like here. It's got fully flat linear bass extension all the way into the sub bass. It has a reasonable sense of ear gain that's not too shouty, it's not glary. I think it's going for something that has some, intentional tasteful colorations. Specifically, it has that mid-range dip at around like 2 kilohertz there, and this can have the effect of, increasing the sense of spaciousness overall. I always find that this tends to come at the cost of that sense of natural presentation or, overall cohesion of the sound, especially for vocals or piano tones. The sort of mid-range completeness, because that's sort of the upper end of the mid-range there. And then also there is, of course, that excess upper treble, and this is a characteristic of what seems to be the sound that Meze likes to go for. So just to have a little bit of flair here and there. And I think overall this is not a bad approach. But then for me, subjectively, there is this resonance at around like 7.8 to 8 kilohertz. That's very specific, but I'm paying very close attention to where these resonances are subjectively, and that's where it is for me, and it doesn't show up there on the graph. And this causes the treble that would otherwise be fairly smooth to sound a bit harsh, a bit on the strident side, we might say. Now, I mentioned that the sound here is kind of like what you get with the Modhouse Tungsten, and so here I'm showing you the measurements comparing the two, and you can see that they're fairly similar. And in saying that, the reality is that for some people, it may sound more like the Tungsten, but for me, it really doesn't. And I think that's kind of a shame because it looks like it should, or it looks like it should sound similar. And it would be really cool if this headphone actually did end up sounding the way that the Tungsten sounds, because this is so much more lightweight, it's so much more easy to drive. It is much more refined and beautifully built. I hope that for people out there who get to try this, that it ends up sounding like that. But to me, it just doesn't. It's just several steps behind. But I will also stress that, like, as a reminder, we shouldn't let the graphs influence how we feel about these products without hearing them. And this is one of the reasons why we actually have to listen to these products. Now, when it comes to the other objective stuff, like harmonic distortion, this is totally fine. You're not going to have any problems with that. I didn't run into any excursion limits or anything like that. So this will take to EQ reasonably. But the problem again here is the EQ that you're going to make, even if you want to be precise and you want to get into trying to, make things as perfect for you as they can be, it's very difficult to go off of the graph with this one. So this is a headphone where, for me, it is EQ required. Unfortunately, I don't think that that's necessarily going to be the case for everybody, but it's also one where EQ is challenging. And I've talked about this in other videos before, but basically the nuance with EQ is that it is a better headphone where it is easy to do. And unfortunately with this one, it is not an easy thing to do because you cannot as easily rely on the graph to get the filters that you would want to adjust. You have to do this subjectively. I mean, you should do it subjectively anyways, but the point is more that, like, this is not as simple as just like looking at a graph, seeing where there's some excess energy and fixing that. Again, this has nothing to do with the upper treble air boost that they have. I think that's fine. I think if this is the kind of sound signature, if I were to actually get this, what's measured here at my eardrum, I think there's a case to be made that there's some tasteful flair going on with this headphone. I think that's what they were going for. But again, for me, it just doesn't land. So that's basically my conclusion on the Meze Poet. The sound is reasonable, but not special, even if everything else about it, like the look and the build and all the rest of that stuff, is special. As always, the measurements can be found in a forum thread linked below where other folks are chiming in on this as well. Folks are likely disagreeing with me on there, which is fine, but you can also disagree with me in our Discord, also linked below. And until next time, I'll see you guys later. Bye for now.